Tough start of the week for players everywhere in the world. It always is when you lose to Real Madrid. And over the weekend, we lost 2-1 in a game that many thought that we should have won.
Barca want to win every single game they play. It's as simple as that. It's the demand of being an elite club, an elite historic club for that matter. It's our winning culture, it's the mentality and the foundation of our legacy. And you know what? In Clásicos, all that applies. Only multiply that by 1,000,000. So yeah, Clásicos don't really care about your form. They don't care about your financial situations. They don't care about your coaching inexperience or even injuries. You just have to win every single Clasico. It's just the way it is. So yes, I am not really happy with the results. But weirdly enough, I don't really understand how, but I'm also not too stressed about this overall because I saw things in that game or in that first half, to be more specific, that kind of tend to predict long-term success, if that makes sense.
Obviously, 28 more games to go, so this is not done and dusted. So there's a lot of matches to play. But how much do you think this will actually impact Barca's season, or will it?
I think this is best seen in Gundogan's response. He wants the team to show more passion, more anger for losing this because yes, we played well. We were even the better team, but that cannot be our solace. You can't find solace in just being the better team if you don't win. So classical losses or classical wins are always a big breaking point of the season. It can be a springboard to motivate you to do more, or it can be something that kind of puts you all the way down and forces you to rethink. So we'll see how it affects this particular group of people because we have players whose mentality, I think, has improved or is improved compared to the players that we used to have. So I think this particular group can actually build on this loss. There's multiple things to discuss, and we will discuss all of them today. I think it will be premature of us to just say, oh, Xavi's in the wrong, Xavi has done something wrong. Xavi's done a lot of things well this game. I think this needs to be said because in games like these, you have to take something out of it. You have to learn a couple of lessons. You have to adapt, you have to improve. It is Anceloti who needs to be given praise and needs to be given his flowers because he has shown us how to do well in game management, in game situations, on the spot. He reacts to what's in front of him and he has the options to back up his plan. So I think in that regard, he has Xavi beat. Not just in the squad depth that showed to be crucial, but also in how he approaches those substitutions, when he makes them, and what's the idea behind them.
Right. And these are the two pass maps. On the left in the blue, Barca, and on the right, it's Real. I have only one question on this. Seems like Barca, for all the tactical discipline, didn't really have a lot of link-up play with the forwards that they had, even though Gavi and Fermin were pretty lively. But it seems like it was Gundo, Gavi, and Fermin who were playing the role of the strikers rather than the strikers themselves.
At the moment, looking at the elite teams across Europe, Barca are one of the only ones who are consistently not scoring in line with their expected goal. So what this means is that we are creating enough chances to score, but we are not converting those chances into actual goals. And like it or not, this is a big problem. So in a way, Xavi has improved. So Xavi's changes to the roster and the teams and the tactics has improved Barca's chance creation. We are quite good. When I say we're still good at creating those chances, and we have a stable way of creating those chances, but not a stable way of finishing them. And it will hurt you the most against the best of the best teams. So you dominate those teams for the majority of the game, but if you don't finish them off when you have the chance, the chances are that they will come back and their retort, their resurgence, if you will, is almost inevitable at some point. You can't really afford to have a team without elite forwards who can finish chances if you have elite aspirations.
All right. Let's move to the shifts in momentum. This is the expected threat timeline, as you would see. And many people have said it that this was a game of two halves. First half belonged to Barca. And then from the 60th minute onward, it was Real. And that kind of shows up on this chart to an extent. My question, though, however, is that did we allow Real Madrid the ascendancy when we were on top by making substitutions that we might have not made?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Was it Xavi's inexperience showing at the worst possible time? Perhaps, yes. I think that's also a valid point to make. And subs weren't needed. Let's put it that way. Let's put it out immediately. So Xavi needed to do something to freshen up the team. But it takes a lot of experience to know which subs to make and how to use them so you don't really break the cohesion, the dynamics of the team that's already on the pitch and playing if those same dynamics seem to be working, which in Barca's case was true. And then you have the entrance of Lewandowski and Romeo. It does seem like a step backwards because you had to escape that ring of fire Madrid had been building up until that point. And when you consider that Romeo doesn't do well under sustained pressure, and Lewandowski is simply not a good enough tool to give you an outlet or a pressure valve, if you will, you need to wrestle back control. That kind of brings all these decisions into question, right? So in turn, you also lose Ferran's aggressiveness and mobility, and suddenly you're pinned back into your own half and you don't have the tools to escape. I think that's the big point to make here. So yes, the lack of options on the bench made an impact, was a deciding factor. And then subsequently, the sub itself made a difference, but only in a bad way, opposite way.
Okay, so let's now move to another one of those key stats that have been flowing around, which is around cumulative XG. Pretty clear that Barca dominated this. But if you don't take your chances when you get them, the big teams are going to punish you. And that's the reality of the game. We've talked about it a lot, and everybody has, to be honest. But given Barca's situation, financial condition, all of those things that surround this club as we go into the winter market, there is this discussion that we need a defensive pivot. And we need strikers. Maybe Vitor Roque will come, but is he alone enough to take care of the malaise that we see? And if you can only choose one, what would you go for? My vote lies with forwards, because if you don't score goals, you're not going to win games, right? But I would love to know your point of view.
If I could choose one player one area to reinforce, it's difficult because Barca obviously need more than just one player to complete the squad. But I think that Vitor Roque is a signing that will obviously help because he is immensely talented. But I feel like he needs a Lewandowski with him. So he needs someone who's more established to play, and then he can develop alongside that established forward. But the thing is, there are so many other holes that Barca need to plug, one of them being the priority of the defensive midfielder, because we've seen that without that player, Barca will suffer. Now, they can compensate there with a double pivot of sorts. We've seen the different combinations, and even Xavi in this more molded, different kind of defensive midfielder role that we've not yet seen before from him. If he can perform in that role, maybe Barca could survive without a clear-cut number 6 a bit longer. But I don't think that's going to be the case. I think Barca are going to go in the market and they are going to try and secure a defensive midfielder alongside Roque, who's already secured.
All right. So now let's move on to another overall summary of what the game was like. And while there are lots of stats on this graph, I want to call your attention to just one stat, which is the field tilt. 67.7% passes or touches in the opposition box for Real, compared to 32 from Barca, right? So while Barca had the XG, but it looks like when it comes to the final third, Real Madrid pretty much overshadowed Barca throughout that second half through very controlled in the way that they were playing or the strategy that they had. And that is a problem. And that definitely you'll have to give Anceloti some credit there in managing that, because while Barca had the tactical discipline and were playing really great, in the final third, there wasn't that much movement consistently. Yes, we created a few chances, but it was sustained pressure or sustained play that we did against Real anytime in the match.
I think that's a fair point. Real were more concrete in their attempts. I think they need to be given enough props for that. I think Ancelotti in particular, his tactical masterclass is more evident than people would like to admit, right? So sure, squad depth played a big part in that too. Obviously, you can do a lot when your bench options are someone like Camavinga and Modric. But he made the changes at the right time and with the right intent, right? So both subs were made to wrestle back control, and that's exactly what they did in the end on the pitch. Camavinga provided you with more solidity in defense while also enabling Madrid to not only have a smoother build-up, but also have a player who can both invert and stay back and hold the width a little bit if needs be on the left side of the pitch. And then you had Modric, who does a bit of everything, and he does all of that and brings you control on the highest of levels. And even Joselu as well, when he was on the pitch, being that focal nine who can wrestle back control when he's shoulder to shoulder with the defenders, when he's being aggressively and tightly marked, he can lay off the ball, he can control the ball and keep it retained in Madrid's possession. So all those subs made strides towards Madrid wrestling back that control. And essentially that's what they did. They did a factory reset. They reverted back to what was more stable, what was more familiar to them, a more familiar shape, more familiar structure. And they could retain the ball better. And as you've alluded to as well, they could wait for Barcelona to be forced into relying on their own bench, on their own subs, and which we now know were inadequate. They were not good enough.
All right. So I'll finally move to the last point that I have on this before we talk about tactics. And this is shots from a distance. Now, Fede Valverde will be the happiest man. Probably he's got the most, I think, against Barca in real time. But in recent times in Clasico, this is not the first time that Barca conceded a goal from a pile driver. It was struck from a distance. And in this game, if you look into it, Madrid had 62% of shots from outside the box. Now, that can't be a coincidence. That has been drilled into the team, that have been told by the coach that you got to go and take your chances out there, because that's a heavy number. And if that's true, does it mean that Barca finally need to start looking for a long-term goalkeeper as well?
Yeah, I would agree with that. First of all, I do want to start with a positive somehow here, because I would like to say that Barcelona were defensively very solid. That first half, at least, they were solid enough to block Real Madrid from shooting from more favorable positions. Now, when you have incredible ball strikers like Madrid have in Tchouaméni and Valverde and Bellingham, that's a very effective tool for breaking even the most stubborn of defensive blocks. But you would always, as a team that relies on these possession-heavy aspects, you would always rather face those long-distance attempts than the more clear-cut, short-distance ones. And on the other side of the coin, you would also always rather be in the position to be able to attempt those short-distance shots than the long-distance one. So I still think that Barcelona did well to limit Real Madrid to that form of attacking. And I truly believe Real's high long shot percentage is, in one part at least, due to them being forced into it as well. Maybe there was some instruction going into it with Ancelotti saying, look, this is how we break down the block. This is how we make that crack or dent in Ter Stegen's armor. Yes, that's entirely possible. But I also think that Barca forced them into that tactic a bit more as well. I still see Ter Stegen as a key player in so many of our moments, or good moments, for us to say that he's just simply and plain not good enough. I think that's a very heavy criticism for him. And then there's also the question of who would we get, even if that were true. Can Barca even afford to go into the market and look for a goalkeeper when they need a striker so badly, when they need a defensive midfielder so badly, when they need depth at fullback as well? And could someone like Iñaki Peña, for example, could he be the solution then? But I think that's a bit too complex of a topic to discuss just now. So I think maybe we park that one for a different video. So there's a couple of situations I would like to analyze on the tactics board. And I think there's a couple of good things and there's some bad things. And as usual, I would like to start with the positives, because I feel like Xavi needs to be given some credit, because the first 45 minutes I felt like it was an exhibition of great coaching. I would even go as far as to say that Xavi has outcoached Ancelotti in the first 45 minutes. So let's see what exactly happened and how did he achieve that. So with this line of 5 here, we have 5 defenders, but Balde and Cancelo, what they do is they push forward and they become these makeshift wingers, both of them holding with. Cancelo would be the one acting as a proper winger at times, while Balde was also an outlet, and he was someone who has these attacking tendencies, but he was slightly lower than Cancelo, which we will see later on. And the main thing here is to know the 3 defenders and the 2 midfielders, a double pivot. So Barca had this very stable, very compact 3+2 base, which they built upon. And you can already see that Real Madrid are starting to have some dilemmas in approaching this defensive structure. For example, Valverde here, he has to decide whether he wants to press Inigo or he has to track back and press Balde, because either choice leaves something on the other side. So if he doesn't press Inigo here, Barca have an effective 3 versus 2 in the first line. They can recycle play, they can eject their center backs, and they can build from the back properly as they normally like to do. But if he decides to track Inigo, all of a sudden Felix and Balde can create an overload on Carvajal, and Barca can switch play and access this 2 versus 1 and make a play that way and create in the final third. Now, what will usually happen, or very often at the very least, would be that Barca will recycle play here because they have 3 versus 2, and the ball will go out wide to the center backs. And since Vinicius and Rodrigo can't really mark 3 players at the same time, Vinicius is late to pressing Araujo, and Araujo can run with the ball into this space right here. Now, once he runs here, Bellingham has to make a choice. Again, this is a dilemma. Does he stick with Fermin Lopez a bit deeper and allow Araujo all the space in the world to orchestrate play, or does he press Araujo, but then have this risk of having Fermin behind him open and ready to receive the ball? This was all happening in the middle of the pitch where Madrid have these dilemmas and they don't know, because in the moment you have to make a decision in a split second, and if you make the wrong one, Barca would capitalize on that. So what happens is Araujo runs with the ball, Bellingham jumps up and he leaves Fermin open. Araujo can access Fermin with his right foot, and Fermin is in all the space that he needs. And this is where Barca make a difference, because usually Barca would force play, Barca would receive in space and time, and the first instinct was always, let's go forward, bombard forward, play the diagonal ball into runners, and have a go that way. But this time around, what I found really interesting was Barca actually beating the press of Madrid, so beating this first and second line, being in space and enough time here in the middle third, and then saying, okay, let's stop, let's regroup, and let's think. Gundogan, in particular, I saw him multiple times throughout the game. He was signaling with his hands. He's saying, stop on the ball. Let's wait. Let's be patient with this. And Barca would stop and regroup in this middle third of the pitch, and they would build this, noose around Real Madrid, and they would pin them back, recycle the ball, and find the free man that they would eventually create an access.
Quick question to you, Don, on this, and fascinating example and explanation. My question was, it seemed like while on the right, Cancelo, Araujo, Fermin were quite lively, and then there was involvement from Gundogan in the game. It seemed like Balde wasn't as effective as he has been in the recent past. And it also seemed like Valverde had sacrificed some of his attacking instincts in just blocking that Balde threat up the flank.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was actually going to be my next example. Because Ancelotti initially didn't really imagine that setup to play out that way. So initially, he wanted to have Valverde much higher up the pitch. He wanted to have Valverde running at Barcelona, being that threat, and even off the ball, he wanted Valverde to be able to press the first line of Barcelona. However, seeing how easy it was for Barca to just create these overloads on the other side and be far more threatening, because if Felix ever decides to drop, which he normally does, if he drops into midfield, Carvajal has a big choice to make. Do I follow him and then leave all this space behind me, or do I stick and stay here where I am, but then Felix has more space and time to receive between the lines? So instead, he decided to put Valverde all the way back onto Balde, which of course now meant that Carvajal and Felix were inseparable. So that's what happened. When Felix moved back, Carvajal could stick to him, knowing that now Valverde and Rudiger have his back, and you see the space that he leaves behind. Now, both of these players can actually drop deeper, they can stay back, and they can enable Madrid to remain defensively solid while still man-marking some of Barcelona's biggest difference makers when receiving between the lines. But of course, nothing in football ever comes for free. So when you put Valverde all the way back, now you always play with a disadvantage in the first line, because you see now Inigo, Araujo, and Christensen have a clear 3 versus 2. And that's what Barca were, again, building upon, because this 3 versus 2 meant that now Christensen can eject Inigo forward, and Inigo can run with the ball all the way here. And then from here, you can make these combination plays. You gain territory, and then you combine with the forwards in the final third. Now, the way Barca do that, they always have runners as well, because Fermin and Ferran can try and exploit the space that Carvajal leaves behind. Or if Balde tries and pins Valverde here, you can always have a runner try and exploit that area that's open. So even though Ancelotti adapted, and in a way he suffocated Balde, he suffocated Felix, Barca could still gain something in return. And that's how football works, because you gain something, but at the same time you have to sacrifice something else to gain that in the first place. Now, this next scenario I would like to discuss is actually the shift in the tides and Madrid on the ball. And again, to start with a positive thing, I feel, as I've alluded to earlier in the video, that Barca have done a very good job at containing Madrid, not just their transitional power, but also how they were building up from the back, how they were sustaining their attacks in the first half of the game. So we see here that Barca start with 5 defenders again, but this is not really how their press will work. Instead, what will happen is Cancelo will move forward, and he will assume more of a right midfielder role out of possession, and Fermin would join Ferran as the second striker, or in a more traditional 4-4-2 formation. That way, now all of a sudden you have 2 Barcelona players man marking the center backs of Madrid. However, again, as we've said, nothing comes for free in football. So now, if Barca want to press the fullbacks with their midfielders, so Felix on Carvajal and Cancelo on Mendy, what happens in the middle of the pitch? Gundogan and Xavi are all of a sudden overloaded. There's 4 players in the middle for Madrid, and there's only 2 for Barcelona. This is a very unfavorable position for Barca to be in. And if Madrid can access any of these players, they have essentially bypassed the whole first line of Barcelona. And this is where these issues of the lack of compactness come for Barca. We talked about this a lot. We wrote pieces about this because this is one of the main flaws of Barca's current project. However, Barca did manage to be much more dosed in their pressing. So Cancelo and Felix would stay as part of the 4 here, and Barca would, instead of forcing both players to press the center backs, they would always keep one, not always, but often would keep one player on the pivot, and the other player would play deference. He would chase both center backs, just be a nuisance in the front line. And if things panned out the right way, which they often did in the first half, if you have Fermin tracking Tchouaméni and Ferran on Rudiger, and Felix pushes up here on Carvajal, Gundogan is on Valverde, everyone is man-marked. In an ideal situation, what happens is that Rudiger will go to Alaba will go to Mendy, and all of a sudden, Barca would trigger the press. Because when the ball goes all the way wide, you have the assurance of the line, which acts as an additional man in defense, and Barca can more easily collapse on top of Madrid, and that way retain the ball. And we saw Vinicius dropping deeper to try and get the ball in this position right here and run with it, but he had Araujo tightly mark him at all times.
This is a framework that seems to be working, or at least seemed to work against Real in the Clasico. Do you think there's something in this framework that Xavi should build on for the bigger games that might be coming in the CL?
Absolutely, because what we saw here was not Barca pressing in a kind of suicide press kind of way. They were very dosed in their aggression, and that's the key here, because they had this very solid base of 3 defenders. Let me just reset the board real quick. They had a solid base of 3 defenders and 2 midfielders, which gives them the compact 3-2 unit. Now, this means this is a very solid base to have in possession, but also out of possession, because it allows for compactness. And the fact that you have 2 players on the sides here who don't really press aggressively, and they don't really leave their forwards out to dry, that means that you have a unit pressing the back line. You don't have one line pressing and the other line being so far back that the support cannot arrive in time. What Barca do often is they will attempt to press, but the supporting players who have to press the second line are so far away that by the time they arrive to support the first line, the play is already over because the press has already been bypassed and the opposition can build from there. So I feel like dosing your aggression, don't go into suicide presses all the time against every type of opponent. I think that might be a recipe for sustained success, especially in Europe, where teams will look to capitalize on your lack of compactness, on your lack of defensive awareness, and your lack of intense man marking and tracking. Now, the last thing I would like to discuss with you today is the adaptation that Madrid made, mostly in the second half, but also we saw some of that process being started in the first half as well. So when things got tough and Madrid couldn't really get out of Barca's press, they did two things. First of all, they added an additional player into the back line. So that means that Kroos, for example, which we often see him do, he would drop into the back line and he would create this natural three in the back against Barca's two players who were the main or the first line of press out of possession. So now you have 3 versus 2. I'll just switch him like this. You have the 3 versus 2. And if they recycle the ball well, which they often do, Fermin and Ferran cannot cover these 3 players. And Kroos has a lot of time and space on the ball to actually deploy his famous long balls into the forwards, into the space, into players who can retain the possession higher up, and Madrid can progress and gain territory that way. Now, Camavinga was actually the crucial substitution as well, because now all of a sudden you have a player who can do that instead of Kroos. You can have Kroos in this higher position without losing anything in the back, because Camavinga on the ball and Mendy on the ball is not the same thing. Camavinga being here means that Madrid have a reliable defender, but at the same time, they have someone who's reliable on the ball and can connect with these players in the middle. So if he is pressed, he is far more likely to be able to access these players in behind, players who are now a lot freer to receive the ball between the lines and then connect with the forwards who are further up the pitch. And Joselu is very similar in a sense that he will help retain the ball. He won't be a big passer. He won't be a false nine type of player. No, but if the ball is to be played, let's say a big diagonal ball comes into Joselu, he can handle Inigo being on his back, retain the ball, not lose it, and then lay it off into one of Madrid's biggest strengths now, which is the midfielders and the runners who come from the second plan and attack the back line through the half spaces, even through the central spaces as well. And suddenly Madrid have the superiority inside the box, and they can just create on the basis of just having the bodies in there and bombarding the box and having the presence where it matters the most. And then in come Xavi's subs, where you have someone like Romeu and someone like Lewandowski, who don't really help much in this situation, because Romeu doesn't do well under pressure and Lewandowski is not an outlet. So all of a sudden you have a Madrid who's more primed to retain the ball, recycle the ball, and keep bombarding the box, while Barca, on the other hand, are now even less equipped to be able to handle that and escape that pressure. So that's why Ancelotti's substitutions pushed Madrid in the right direction, and Xavi's subs pushed Barca in the wrong direction.
So hope you found that interesting. In a week from now, we play Real Sociedad, and that won't be an easy game. They're a really good team, coached well, and Barca won't find it easy to score. And if Barca don't win that game, it can be crisis of sorts in Catalonia. Now, we have players who are coming back from injury, so which is always great news. Whether it will reflect into goals, only time will tell. But Barca sure need to figure out a way to score goals if they have to make a dent in the league and not let Madrid or Atletico run away with it. That's it for today. See you on the next one.